For joining us for today's Lunch and Learn on the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. We are very excited to be joined by Kryc. She is the New England Aquarium's Director of Ocean Policy. My name is Abby Bradford. I am Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance's Outreach Manager. MCV protects Maine's environment and our democracy by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today's event. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. Feel free to send your questions and comments as they occur to you to me, Abby, through the chat. You can find that by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen. I'll keep track of your questions and ask them during the Q&A session after Kelly's presentation. This event is being recorded, and the video will be shared with you all later today. You will also be able to find all of our previous Lunch and Learn recordings on the same website, on NCB's website. If you would not like to be included in the video, feel free to turn off your camera and feel free to message Will Sedlak if you're unsure of how to do that or if you have any other technical questions. That is all. Thank you all so much again for joining us, and I will hand it over to you, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can. You sound great.
Okay, great. I am going to sort this out. Hi, everyone. As Abby mentioned, I am Kryc. I'm the New England Aquarium's Director of Ocean Policy. I've been at the aquarium for just over 2 years now. And since I'm talking to a wonderful group of Maine constituents, I wanted to share with you that the New England Aquarium is actually also a constituent in Maine. We have a research station in Lubec, and it's active right now. We've been conducting North Atlantic right whale research there for several decades. And so I just wanted to share that since the New England Aquarium, while we're based on the Boston Harbor front, we're your aquarium too. We opened several weeks ago, and if you happen to find yourself in Boston, we would love to welcome you back to our facility. Okay, with that, I'm going to jump into a topic that's become a little bit of an issue for Maine based on some activity that's happened in your great state with a presidential visit, and then made headlines again this week at the Republican National Convention. So I'd like to also, as I step into this, thank the Ocean Defense Initiative for facilitating this introduction to MCV and for putting together some really great content that I'm going to share with all of you. And with that, I'm going to kick it off, and Abby's going to keep track of my time a little bit to make sure that we can get all of the great stuff in that we're going to talk about today. Okay, I just want to take a very high level kind of 30,000 foot view as we think about the ocean and the role that the ocean plays in all of our lives, and then drill down into the specifics of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. This slide, I think, really sets the stage for the role that the ocean plays for sustaining all life on Earth. I'm an oceanographer by training. I studied climate change for my dissertation. And so thinking about how the ocean is linked to climate, but also to all of our health and well-being is something that I care deeply about, and hope to be able to share a little bit about that with you today. The ocean is one of the reasons that the planet remains habitable as climate has been changing at a really unprecedented rate over the past couple of centuries. This graphic, it really beautifully shows how much of the heat is being absorbed by different planetary components. And as you can see here, that the ocean plays a really outsized role in taking up the excess heat in our atmosphere that's coming from greenhouse gas emissions. And so because of that, the temperature on Earth, while warming, has not warmed as quickly as it could have been. But there are real impacts for that as the ocean takes up that heat. There are chemical changes and there are temperature changes that are affecting its ability to continue to buffer the planet on our behalf. And so this kind of describes that, in that I already mentioned warmer temperatures, and I put that in bold just because I'm going to focus a lot on warmer temperatures because it's such an important component of what's happening in the Gulf of Maine. The excess greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, are making the ocean water more acidic, which makes it a little less conducive for certain types of life. It's also deoxygenating the water, and as we all really can I think, sympathize with, oxygen is pretty important for all of us, and that includes all the life in the ocean as well. So focusing on warmer temperatures, there's some really impressive work coming out of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute that has been showing really an unprecedented oceanic heat wave happening in the Gulf of Maine. And as you look at this figure, the colors that you're looking at, the red colors just mean that the water temperature is the darker the red, the more the higher the temperature is above a long-term average. Okay, and the same is true for blue on the cooler side. And so I need my slide here, and I just have to move the pictures. For the past 30 years, the Gulf of Maine has been warming by an average of 0.06 degrees centigrade per year. And what that translates to is that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the global ocean, which is really an incredible thing to think about. And as we think about what that means for life in the ocean, there's definitely some winners and some losers in the near term there. And one of those things is going to be relevant for what we're going to talk about with the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, which is lobster. So I think that this figure is really illustrative. When I was going to school up here in New England, I think of the lobster industry as being so key and iconic to New England. And over time, this is specifically lobster landings in Maine, and learning this was really helpful to me in that back as far as the 50s, you can see really the increase in lobster landings and the value of the industry to the state over time, with really a huge increase in the past decade, really concurrent with some of that temperature change. Lobsters used to be kind of centered, the industry, on Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And as the temperatures are changing, the biogeography of lobster and all sorts of other species in the region are shifting north to stay in their sweet spot for their favored temperature, just like we do. And so this industry is critical to Maine, and especially in the past 10 years, where I think the average, right, the last year, the entire lobster industry in the United States was valued at about 685 million. And you can see that Maine's contribution to that is really the outsized portion of that. And so this is not an insignificant issue. And really, climate change scientists are also estimating that as the Gulf of Maine continues to warm, that the center of lobster concentration is also going to continue shifting north into Canada. And so the type of things that the industry in the southern New England states are experiencing, we can anticipate that trend to continue also into Maine as the lobster concentrations move north towards Canada. All right, so I'm going to come back a little bit to the ocean and the importance of the ocean for planetary health. And I want to make sure that there's a really positive note. The ocean has proved itself to be incredibly resilient, and the science is clear that the ocean can continue to maintain life on Earth, but we must take decisive action in the very near term to make sure that it can continue to do that. And the really good news is that we know exactly what needs to be done. And so with that, I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper into some of the ocean-based solutions to climate change, and then get into the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. Okay. Ocean climate means how can we use the ocean as a solution to climate change, as opposed to, as we look at even headlines today, the bad news stories that sometimes come out of the ocean with the storm surge in the Gulf states, and some of the coastal resilience issues that our coastal communities are are facing with respect to global climate change. And so there's really three big things we can do that, that can help the ocean be resilient. And the first is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's just the first step in mitigating climate change. You're looking at an oil platform here, but the ocean-based solution to this is really through offshore renewable energy solutions like wind, like marine hydrokinetic energy. We need to be able to protect the ocean's ability to store carbon, and we can see that in wetlands and estuaries, that the ocean stores a great deal of excess carbon, and we can enhance that by protecting and restoring those ecosystems. And the final thing, which I'm going to focus on for the rest of the talk, is really increasing the resilience of oceans and coastal ecosystems. And one of the ways that we can do that is by setting aside special places in the ocean. We can manage our fisheries sustainably, and we can stop the flow of pollution into the ocean. And again, I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper into the first one of those, which is protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. This is a global call right now. Scientists have declared that we can protect the planet and protect the ocean and protect ourselves by setting aside special places that have high biodiversity and that represent all the different geographies and biogeographies of the planet. Biodiversity, systems with high biodiversity, they naturally have resilience. So in places where we see entire intact ecosystems from the base of the food chain all the way to the apex predators like sharks, that those systems are able to withstand the changes in temperature or acidity or oxygen in a way that highly impacted systems that have been harmed by human activities, they don't have the same amount of resilience. And so by protecting biodiversity and setting aside some of these special places, we are in fact protecting not just the ocean, not just the ecosystems, not just wildlife, but ourselves, our livelihoods, and all of the economies that depend on a healthy ocean, including all of those in New England. I've focused here on the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, which was established in 2016 by President Obama using the authority under the Antiquities Act. There are a number of different ways that we can set aside protected places in the ocean, and the Antiquities Act is one of those. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the other mechanisms, but the Antiquities Act gives presidents the authority to set aside places in the United States for protection, excuse me. Traditionally, that's been done on land, and I'm sure many of you have visited monuments. You have one in Maine, in Katahdin, and so I'm out here in Colorado right now, and looking forward to visiting a few new monuments myself. And recently, the Antiquities Act has been used to set aside places in the continental offshore in the continental. In our continental shelf, which extends 200 miles beyond the continent. Those are US waters. And so to date, the Antiquities Act has been used to set aside 5 monuments, 4 of which are in the Pacific. This monument, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, is the only marine national monument in the entire US Atlantic. It's also the only marine national monument in the continental US continental shelf waters. So all of the 4 others are offshore in the remote Pacific. This monument is 130 miles from Cape Cod. So it's far, it's far. And I want to make a note, I put a little note to note that because of what's been happening in the state of Maine, that the monument is more than 200 nautical miles from anywhere in Maine. So it takes a really long time to get there. And this will be relevant when we talk about some of the impacts of the presidential proclamation and whether or not that helps fishermen in the near or the long term. The monument itself comprises 3 underwater canyons. The the largest of which, Oceanographer Canyon, is deeper than the Grand Canyon. And I'm going to show you a flyover video that kind of gives you a sense of just how grand these canyons are. It also comprises 4 seamounts, the tallest of which is as high as anything east of the Rocky Mountains. So these are really big, they're really old, they're really fabulous geologic features. I'm a geologist, so these things, just the scale and the grandeur are really impressive. Now, when the monument was first proposed, these 2 units, the canyon unit and the seamount unit, were actually meant to be continuous, but due to the public process that happened and the stakeholder input that was sought, those 2 units were split to enable fishing to continue in some of the more fertile and desirable fishing grounds on the margins of this. So I'm trying to anticipate a couple questions there, but there was indeed a public process, and there were changes made in response to the stakeholder feedback. That doesn't mean that it was an ideal process. So, but I would love to answer questions about that. Okay. I'm now going to show you a video, and so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, and hopefully this will all go very smoothly.
Pilot, dive super.
Dive super pilot.
Ready to dive?
Pilot is ready.
Going down. 50 meters and hold, please.
Looks great.
Okay, I hope that that was inspiring in many different ways about how remarkable the deep ocean is. A lot of what you were seeing were deep sea corals, which are different from, I'm multitasking while I try to figure out how to get the other PowerPoint up. Deep sea corals are different from the corals that you would see in Florida or the Caribbean. Just one second while Okay, you guys can see my screen again? What you saw were deep sea corals that take thousands of years to grow. They're often called soft corals, and they grow really, really deep and in the dark. They are known for having symbionts. You saw some sea stars wrapped around them. You saw octopus, and you saw fish, and some of the really spectacular colors of the ecosystem there. So that ecosystem is really spectacular, and it's a confluence of both the geology that enables that and the oceanographic system that helps to create this incredibly productive, incredibly biodiverse system. So those corals, there's lots of nutrients in the water, and they're releasing nutrients, and that's sustaining an entire food chain of activity. And so on top of the highly productive waters, the topography, the bathymetry of the system is enabling that nutrient-rich water to upwell to the surface, where larger predators are able to kind of capitalize on that. And so this photograph that you're looking at, I'm hopeful that your screens are big enough that you can see this, but what we see here, the New England Aquarium's been doing aerial surveys for the past several years to kind of really document the spectacular biodiversity. So you saw it from the submersible footage, all of the amazing things happening at the subsurface, but that translates all the way to the surface. And what you're seeing here, can you all see all this pink material here? These are squid, and this is a dolphin who is literally at a buffet. And we see this in an incredible way every time we fly out there. So I'm just going to show you some of the amazing things that we see when we fly out there. These are just a few of my favorite, but when we fly out there, within an hour in one flight, we saw 1,500 individual animals. There's huge congregations of animals. So that's what this picture is here of the dolphins. We see sperm whales. This, in our flight earlier this year, we saw blue whales for the first time. And then the flight that we just did, I think a little over a week ago, we saw 4 whale sharks, which is pretty cool. We also saw schools of hammerhead sharks and manta rays pretty far north. So this is just a really way to visually show you how biodiverse this area is, and how much life this particular region in the ocean supports, not only from the bottom, but all the way to the top. And so that was part of the scientific justification that was provided to the Obama administration in creating the argument on behalf of setting aside this place to set it aside to protect it from some of the harmful human activities that can happen as humans use the ocean. And that includes, in this case, fishing. The Antiquities Act also sets aside these places from extractive industries such as offshore oil and gas, as well as mining. So for the past 4 years, until June, these 5,000 square miles were set aside, and they were strongly protected from any human activity in the area. Now, one thing that did come out of the 2016 proclamation is that anybody who was fishing, so the fixed fisheries who were in there, were given a 7-year moratorium. So fishing activities have continued in the monument, so there's a little bit of a balancing act that's being achieved as we consider this place. Okay, so that brings us to today, really, and the recent visit of President Trump to the state of Maine in June, where he met with a roundtable of fishermen and lobstermen, and signed a proclamation. And that proclamation rolled back all of the protections that I just described, not all of them, I'm sorry, the fishing protections in the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument, which means that commercial fishing activities can commence in the monument. And I want you to reflect a little bit on some of that bottom, the life that you saw on the bottom with the corals. Those ecosystems are highly vulnerable, and any type of bottom activity can irreparably harm both the coral species, but the entire ecosystem on which the entire water column depends. And so groups like the New England Aquarium oppose this rollback because we really see the value in setting aside special places to allow the ocean to recover from all of the human activities that are happening everywhere else. So the proclamation, I do want to make one really nuanced comment, which is the Antiquities Act that the monument was established under gives presidents the authority to set aside these places, but the law itself is entirely silent on how you take back a designation. So that's an outstanding question and something that I think will be part of the dialogue going forward as other organizations challenge this decision in court. Now, the monument came up again just this week when Jason Joyce, a lobsterman from Maine, spoke at the convention to talk about the monument and some of the other policies. And what really struck me is something that New England Aquarium completely agrees with, which is that Maine lobstermen don't fish in the monument. And that's a direct quote from the lobstermen. And I do want to also say we totally agree with Jason that revoking the steps to eliminate the tariffs, specifically with the European Union this week, are in fact what will be most impactful to help this community in the face of the challenges that they're facing right now. But the monument itself is highly unlikely to make any measurable difference to lobster landings, lobster value, or the ability of people to both protect special places and continue to fish. So the one nuanced piece, we've talked about antiquities, but one thing that Jason mentioned is that the monument, the designation of the monument, which again, the authority was through Antiquities Act, circumvented a process established by the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which would put the Fishery Council in charge of conservation of marine living resources, which is a highly effective science-based tool for managing the US commercial fisheries. Now, whether or not Magnuson can effectively be used to also conserve effectively special places from the impacts of extractive industries on the ocean, I think that's something that the president's actions in New England have now opened up for discussion. And I just, as I close up this part of the talk, just want to reinforce the existential threat that climate change faces, that climate change is bringing to the Gulf of Maine and all of us who depend on the ocean for the things that we do for our livelihoods and our well-being, and that harkens back to some of the earlier slides that I showed. And so with that, I just want to make a plug for the value of marine protected areas in the ocean and our need to have more, not less of them. They conserve biodiversity. And I think that I hopefully showed you what an amazing place the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts are for the amount of biodiversity that's right here in New England. They enhance resilience. They enhance fisheries by allowing fish to be protected inside the boundaries. Anything that goes outside the boundaries helps fisheries. They can help protect and restore endangered species and ecosystems. They're sites for education and research, and for those protected places that are closer to shore, they support tourism and livelihoods. And with that, my remarks on the monument are over. So Abby, I'm just going to push play now, right?
Yes, ma'am, you got it.
I'm delighted to share a special message from Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. So with that, I'm going to push play.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. In June, when President Trump signed an executive order opening the Northeastern Canyons and Seamounts National Monument, he failed to take into account how his very own disastrous trade policies led to pain for our fishing communities. It isn't the environmental protections that are to blame, it's the very trade war he started. And this executive order is highly unlikely to benefit the Maine fishing community. Forget the fact that he doesn't have explicit legal authority to unilaterally open up a national monument to commercial fishing. This will absolutely be tied up in litigation for years. So he has reneged on his commitment to provide economic benefits to Maine's fishing industry, especially at a time when markets are overturned, supply chains are in shambles, and trade is uncertain. Plus, the majority of Maine fishermen don't go that far south towards Cape Cod when they do their work. The Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Monument is a biodiverse area where sea corals, whales, and fish thrive. If our oceans are healthy, Maine's economy thrives. With a clean ocean that doesn't bear the brunt of the climate crisis, Maine fishermen will have a future. Without environmental regulations that protect New England's fish species and special populations, Maine fishermen won't have a future. I'm proud to stand beside you as we fight for robust environmental protections that help our lands, oceans, and fishermen navigate the impending climate crisis. We must preserve the legacy of New England's oceans for generations to come. Hello, I'm
A huge thank you again to Congresswoman Pingree for sharing those words. I hope Zoom's inability to stream videos smoothly did not distract from her powerful message. I also would like to encourage you all to call on your other representatives to follow Congresswoman Pingree's lead in calling to continue to protect this amazing and unique area that Kelly has just told us so much about. So I'm going to send a link through the chat right now to a form on the New England Aquarium site where you can just enter your information, and there's a pre-scripted message that you can share with your representatives. And that will also be included in the follow-up email that you'll be sent later this afternoon. In addition, I'd encourage you to visit MCV's social media accounts, which I'll also send through the chat. We have some posts on there now, and we'll have some more later today, thanking Congresswoman Pingree and also calling for our other leaders to act. So please check those out, like them, reshare them, help get some eyes on this really important issue. Okay, so with that, we will jump into the Q&A. You all can send me your questions through the chat, which again, you can find by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen. I'll send a message through the chat as well so you can see my name, where to send them.
Should I keep the screen share up or
yeah,
go ahead? Okay. While the questions are coming in, I wanted to make sure while the video was playing, I didn't have a chance to say, but that really wonderful flyover video I want to acknowledge Dr. Tim Shank at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution for sharing that with me so that I could share it all with you and show really the dramatic offshore environment that we have here in New England.
We received this question earlier in your presentation before you had covered this. Someone was asking, has President Trump threatened the status of this monument? So since you've so much touched on that, maybe you could just expand on specifically what the president did or attempted to do.
Yes, so as I mentioned, President Obama in 2016 set aside the monument to protect it from the harmful impacts of human activities, specifically commercial fishing, offshore oil and gas mining. And so it has been protected for 4 years until June, when the president visited Maine, signed the proclamation, and immediately revoked the ban on commercial fishing in the confines of the monument. So while the monument itself still exists in name, it is less protected than it was 3 months ago.
Thank you. David asks, you mentioned that we do not have good baseline data on what life exists in the monument. Given that, how might we best go about understanding how that ecosystem will change as the area warms so much?
Yeah, as an oceanographer, and if you've heard other oceanographers speak, you'll probably hear that we know less about the ocean than we do about the surface of the moon, and there's challenges in doing oceanographic research, but that's improving the more mapping that we do, the more satellite research that we're able to do, the more observations that we can do remotely and in situ, which just means we're on site on a boat. The types of things that the aquarium is doing with the aerial surveys. Every time the NOAA Okeanos, which is all that footage you saw from the submersibles, every time they go out there, they discover new species. So our baseline is improving and really just confirming what we know, which is that this is a highly biodiverse area, that it supports an awful lot of life, and that more research will continue to confirm that. And I think that, you know, as an oceanographer, I'd be remiss in saying we'd love to find out what the rest of those canyons and seamounts are doing, not just those within the monument, and how is that supporting our entire ecosystem here in the Gulf of Maine and offshore. So, Abby, could you repeat the end of that question to make sure that I answered it?
So given the lack of baseline data, how will we be able to track the effects of climate change on the monument, essentially?
Oh, on the monument specifically, the effects of climate change. I think that that's a call for more research and the need to get out there and do more sustained measurements. From a scientist perspective, I would love to see some permanent buoys out there just doing baseline oceanographic measurements to keep getting out there with ships and continue to do the aerial surveys so that we can continue to see with our short timeline of much more frequent research in the monument, how is that changing over time, and how does that track against the big ecosystem changes we're seeing where there is higher frequency monitoring throughout the region.
We've gotten a few questions on the same topic, and I'm thinking of how to group them. The gist is that if Trump's action does not benefit Maine's lobstermen, why have some come out in support of him? And then similarly, some in the commercial fishing industry point out that the nonprofit community claimed that the monument was a pristine, productive, important area even while commercial fishing was allowed. And so they're pointing out, if it was pristine while fishing was occurring, why can't fishing occur now?
Sure, I think that's a good question, and I think speaks to the tension of the multiple users of the ocean, and how do we balance all of the needs that we have of the ocean, not only as humans, but all of the life that depends on the ocean, from the wildlife in the ocean and the ecosystem. I will put out there that as a scientist, I think that the concept of pristine is not something we should be aspiring to in the ocean. Every place on Earth has been impacted by human activity. And whether that be through fishing or pollution, or as the temperatures are changing and the pH is changing, these are all changes that have been brought on by humans. And so The reason the boundaries of this particular monument are where they were drawn is because there was not excessive fishing activity in the monument. So they were specifically chosen to have the least amount of impact on the industry. And as I mentioned before, the original proposed boundary was much bigger, and it was decreased to reflect that stakeholder input. So to the question about whether or not fishing was impacting this specific monument, yes, and it continues to. There are still permits. There's still fishing allowed in the monument for those people who held permits before they again were granted that 7-year moratorium. Recreational fishing is still allowed in the monument. It was never prohibited, and so. So again, these are nuanced questions, but the important piece for someone like me is, again, finding that balance that we're talking about in terms of the footprint of the monument, less than 1% of the entire U.S. Atlantic Ocean. The rest of the U.S. Atlantic Ocean is not set aside as a monument. It is available for management by the fisheries management councils. And so from a balance perspective, I would again argue that we need more protected areas, not less, to enable fishing to continue, so that the ocean does become resilient to all of the changes that are anticipated that we cannot control right now. Temperatures are going to continue to rise. pH is going to continue to decrease. And oxygen, as the ocean deoxygenates, we're looking at much bigger problems for our fisheries than setting aside this tiny area that might just help create a resilient ecosystem if we had more interconnected, protected areas that would help us to become more resilient to the changes that are anticipated. That was a really long answer, and I sometimes get off on a tangent. So if there's if I didn't hit specific pieces of that question, let me know, and I'm happy to revisit it.
No, I think the first part of your answer cleared that up a lot. So you specifically mentioned that the monument was scaled down in size, that existing permits were allowed to continue to fish, and that recreational fishing is still allowed. Were there other concerns raised during the public input process? And if so, were changes made to the monument in response?
Okay, I'm going to now admit that we are outside of my both my time span in New England and I did not directly participate in this process. So there might be other people on the call who can answer this, or on this webinar who might be able to answer that more fully than I can. But the major opposition to the monument has been from the fishing community. So at least from the perspective of when I joined this discussion, it has really been about the legality of whether or not the monument could be, whether or not the president has the authority to designate a monument in offshore, so in a marine environment. And also, what's the best mechanism for protected areas? Antiquities Act, Magnuson, the National Marine Sanctuaries Act. We also have a really big sanctuary here in the Gulf of Maine and Stellwagen. And so each one of those mechanisms has its pros and cons. And I think from an ocean conservation perspective, from the New England Aquarium's perspective, we would say that each one of those has a role and can be used and should be deployed in different circumstances to achieve the best outcome on behalf of the ocean and everybody who depends on it.
What kind of fishing does and would take place in the monument now that it's been open to more commercial fishing, and what would be the impacts of that type of fishing?
Okay, yes, that's a great question. So the fixed line fisheries, there's lobster and red crab, and those are the fisheries that were allowed to stay for the 7 years. And those potentially have a very big impact as gear on the bottom can interact with the life on the bottom. So as we mentioned, the corals, the deep sea corals can take thousands of years to grow. And so if gear gets dragged past any of those corals, they can be damaged permanently and obviously are not very fast growing. And that's what's really supporting the base of the food chain that's translating to the world's biggest animal being present in the blue whale that we're seeing, in the blue whales that we see at the surface. So from the smallest to the biggest. So those are the two fixed line. And then in terms of the pelagic fisheries, squid and butterfish, some of the highly migratory species like tuna, all of those can be are potential commercial fisheries in the area, and certainly are happening on the outside of the monument, and now can happen on the inside. And I want to give credit to the Natural Resources Defense Council for doing some really great economic analysis about 1.5 years ago, showing that since the monument was designated, that landings of those commercial species have actually gone up since the designation of the monument, not gone down. And so while the monument is probably not why those landings went up, what that economic analysis shows is that the fisheries were not negatively impacted by the designation of the monument, at least not in the few years of data that we have since the monument was designated.
Are there any other identifiable actions underway to have Trump allow drilling or mining in the monument? In other words, is opening fishing just the first step?
To my knowledge, there's no discussion about opening the monument to offshore oil and gas interests, to mining, that's still protected from those extractive industries. And there's a great deal of support from all the stakeholders, whether you are an environmentalist or a fisherman or a scientist, against establishing an offshore oil and gas industry up here in New England or in the Atlantic Ocean. And that has a great deal of bipartisan support or opposition to not allow those industries to establish themselves in the Atlantic. That said, there is also a great deal of support for one of those climate mitigation tools that was mentioned earlier in my talk, which is offshore wind energy and the huge potential for New England to play in offsetting greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning to a clean energy economy up here.
Can you explain a bit more why marine protected areas help boost fishing stocks for the areas surrounding them?
Yeah, and so I'm going to rely on some science that hasn't been done in the monument. So this has not been proven for this monument, but globally, when you set aside a marine protected area that's highly or fully protected, meaning you cannot fish inside of it, is that the fish inside are able to get big. And so they're not caught, and big fish have more babies. And so if you allow places where the fish can be protected and grow big and fat, they have lots more babies, and then everybody moves outside of the boundaries of the monument. And that's what's called a spillover effect. And so if you fish on the margins of that, you can catch all of those spillover fish. And so we would love to be able to do the science to show that over time, sometimes that takes time for the ecosystem to recover enough to allow those fish to grow bigger and allow that productivity to happen. So by doing more science in the monument, we would be able to demonstrate whether or not this monument also has a spillover effect that could be very economically beneficial to fishing in the region. Again, that takes time, though. It's not instantaneous, so it's not always a satisfying answer for, you got to wait 10 or 20 years for the benefit to come from that.
Are there any public education efforts underway in the fishing community around that phenomenon?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I would love to know about any of them, though. If somebody does know about them, we would love to amplify that too.
We've gotten a couple of questions about offshore wind since you mentioned that. What are the impacts of offshore wind, both good and bad, on areas like the monument? Are floating platforms better or worse? And this is a harder question, but how do you weigh those against the climate benefits, which would obviously benefit the oceans across the globe?
Okay, so what are the impacts? How do you weigh and balance? And then I heard something about floating platforms.
Yeah, are floating platforms better than
Yeah.
no.
Okay, whoever answered this question hit on everything that we've been talking about in terms of balanced use of the ocean, and the multiple uses of the ocean. And so I'll start right at the top on offshore wind, which is hopefully from my talk, you saw that the biggest threat to the Gulf of Maine and our marine economy is climate change. That's going to change our way of life more than anything else. One of the key tools in combating climate change is decoupling our way of life from a fossil fuel based energy matrix. And we are blessed up here in New England with having some of the most the best wind potential anywhere in the world. And so establishing an offshore wind industry can be really beneficial in addressing that top level concern, which is how is climate change going to impact us? And it's impacting us now. That said, anytime you do something in the ocean, you have the potential to change that system, sometimes not always for the best. And so we are doing something brand new here in New England. And while other countries have established offshore wind, they're not the same oceanography. It's not the same ecosystem. And so the scientists and industry and organizations like the New England Aquarium, we're working in partnership together to start doing the science to understand what the impacts to the ecosystem will be and proposing ways to mitigate those, any negative impacts. So I think that in working in collaboration and in partnership together and using science to make decisions, we will be in a position to have a well-informed, productive industry established in New England that will bring us jobs and clean energy and address that top level question. So I think it's about balance. I think there's some uncertainty, and I myself am looking forward to seeing how the science bears on that and how we navigate this in a way that benefits both humans and ecosystems with the prospect of offshore wind. The floating platform is a very specific question, and I would just go back to whichever platform is used for establishing the turbines. That will just need to be scientifically researched to understand what the pros and cons are for any type of platform that goes out there. And again, how do we minimize impacts on ecosystems, wildlife, and the environment so that the whole world can benefit from a clean energy economy.
And are there any potential benefits beyond the climate benefits of offshore wind? I've heard of them providing habitat for more surface dwelling organisms in deeper waters.
It could be, and I think that that's a really great question because this is why the science is important, to understand what's there now and what's there in the future. And there are examples, particularly in the offshore oil and gas platforms, where those platforms have served as artificial reefs that have become critical fish hatcheries and nurseries for really key commercial species. And so sometimes there's positive unintended impacts of human activity out in the ocean. So I think that remains to be seen with respect to how that will play out in New England, whether or not there's a fisheries benefit. versus what the impacts are going to be.
How is enforcement of the protections in the monument taking place, or potentially going to take place? Are there concerns about international poaching and harvesting similar to the Russian factory fishing vessels that contributed to the collapse of cod?
Yeah, you know, the United States, because of the Magnuson-Stevens Act that I mentioned briefly, that prohibits really foreign fishing interests in U.S. waters and really set up the U.S. industry for success and for us to be able to benefit from the marine living resources in our own waters. And so while, you know, a lot of the illegal, unregulated, and underreported fishing is happening in the high seas, it's not a huge concern for U.S. fisheries interests. There are some contested areas up in Maine where we haven't really defined the boundary, the maritime boundary between Canada and the United States, and so there's some issues happening where there are contested boundaries, but I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't know anything about what's happening in the Pacific. And I haven't been tracking the Russian vessels. We are not doing active surveillance of the monument. We're able to see ship traffic going through. We're able to use satellite imagery, but for the most part, once the proclamation was made in 2016, there was not illegal fishing happening in the area that was of any measurable amount. So now that it can happen legally, it's up to the councils to determine what and how that area will be used while the litigation makes its way through the system and the courts ultimately decide what's legal and what's not in this area.
All right, we are at 1 minute to 1, so we'll end there. Thank you so much again, Kelly, for your wonderful presentation. And a huge thank you again to Congresswoman Pingree for sharing those words with us today. If you all didn't get a chance to fill out the petition calling on your senators to follow her lead, that will also be included in the follow-up email sent to you later today. So please take just 30 seconds to fill that out. If you have enjoyed this event, which I hope you have, please join us. We do these every Friday on Zoom from noon to 1. We're skipping next Friday for the Labor Day weekend, but we'll be back on the 11th. With Dr. Joseph R. Kelly from my alma mater, UMaine Orono. He'll be talking about the geology of Maine's coast. So I hope you can join us then, and thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.